Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Natasha, for the warm welcome. And thank you to the Economic Club team who's pulled this great event together today. As Natasha said, I'm Sean Congdon, the new President and CEO of Colt Canada. I've been with Colt about 2 months now, so it's a real pleasure to be able to be here and connect with everyone today. Minister Blair, thank you very much for taking the opportunity to spend this time today. We're very grateful for your leadership, especially in these challenging times. We're also grateful for the work that you and your team have done to develop Canada's new defence policy update, and we can't wait to hear more about it today. As Colt's new Chief Executive Officer, I feel a real mix of burden, but also excitement about Canada's future defence industry and Canada's role in the world. The burden, I think, is obvious. The world's at war in Ukraine, the Middle East, and elsewhere. As a sole provider for small arms for the Canadian Armed Forces, as a member of the MSP, the weight that we feel, all of us at Colt Canada, is very significant today. Now, more than any other time in the West's history, I think that sacred responsibility to the men and women who keep us safe is front and center. It's our responsibility that we really embrace and we continue to live up to. I take up my role as CEO. I'm supported by the entire Colt Canada company. We have some of our teammates here today, Joanne, Milton, Alex, and so many of you from across the defense industry. And with this whole entire team, I know our troops are in good hands. At Colt, we're not only aware of the weight of our responsibilities, but we're also energized by it. We're energized by the opportunity to build a safer, more innovative, more productive Canada by partnering with government, our innovative ecosystems, and adopting advanced technology. Colt Canada stands with you, Minister, with our partners, industrial partners in the MSP, with our troops, and certainly our democratic friends and allies at this moment of risk, realignment, and industrial opportunity. Thank you for standing with us today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi. I am very honored. First of all, Sean, thank you for your introductory remarks. I'd like to say thank you to all of you for being here. I particularly want to express my gratitude to the Economic Club for their very kind invitation and the opportunity to come, not just to make some remarks, but also to engage in what I hope will be a good conversation. I've never had a bad conversation with Janice, so I'm really looking forward to that. I also want to acknowledge our industry partners, academia, the diplomatic community, all of you are crucial partners in our efforts to keep Canada safe. Now, I have some, what will be good news, I hope, for all of you, and probably bad news for the people that are here to keep an eye on me. They've given me a very lovely speech I'm not going to give. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the changing environment in which we face, the role of a defense policy update, and what we try to do with that document, because I think it's important that we make a good explanation to Canadians about what our intention is and the purpose of the work that we were doing. First of all, I've been in the business of keeping people safe for most of my life. I had the privilege of doing it here in the City of Toronto. I've been given a number of good opportunities in government. But last summer, when the Prime Minister called me in and asked me, he said, need you to stay, and I said, okay, to do what? And he said, to be the Minister of National Defence. That is about the best job offer I've ever had. And it is an extraordinary opportunity. One of the very first things that I discussed with him is the importance of getting things done. Unfortunately, I'm at a certain age where I'm on the clock, and we've got to get some things done. And I've been around government long enough, and I learned very quickly and was briefed by some outstanding officials and by others about the needs, the things that we needed to do to move forward. And one of the most important things that we were required to do was bring forward a new policy update. Well, I think historically, defense policy updates tend to look like shopping lists. And it really doesn't speak to industry, it doesn't speak to Canadians, it doesn't speak to our allies, our global partners around the world. And so we actually began a very different approach, I think, to bringing forward Canada's new defense policy. One of the first things we did, of course, was I went and consulted with industry. I've been a bit of an advocate for public safety myself in the past, and so I went to industry and I said, what do you need from us? And they were pretty clear in their advocacy that they needed clarity and certainty. They wanted to be good partners. And by the way, they're terrific partners, all of you are. But they wanted to be better partners. But they needed clarity and certainty from their government in their new defense policy update. And so I went back to the Prime Minister and said, Prime Minister, it's becoming kind of apparent to me that I'm not just going to have to write a defense policy, I have to write a new industrial policy. I went and spoke to Global Affairs, and I went to travel and spoke to our allies, and our most important ally, of course, the United States. And I said, this is going to have to be a foreign policy update as well. And then, quite frankly, we came to the realization that it also had to be a new national policy. A policy for Canadians, first and foremost, because it was going to require a significant new investment in defense, in new capabilities. Natasha, there's absolutely no need to apologize. I will also tell you, I strongly believe that the highest law of our land is its Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and one of its most important principles is the freedom of opinion and expression. And so it can be challenging at times. It can also be a little frustrating, but it's okay. I think we have to stand up for the things that we believe in, and all of us need to stand up for the things that we believe in, and so I have no problem. If I may go back a little bit, one of the things that I think it's important to recognize for the Canadian Armed Forces, it has a remarkable history, a proud history. But for over a century and a half, the vast majority of its work has been expeditionary. We've sent the Canadian Armed Forces to fight in Europe and to keep the peace around the world. They've been remarkable. But I think we have become overly reliant at times with our geography. You know, we're surrounded by three oceans, one of which is mostly frozen. At least it has been up till now, and it's starting to open up. We also live next door to a benign and powerful neighbor. And I think because of our geography, the remarkable advantage of our geography, we did not always appreciate our responsibilities to defend ourselves in our own country. But when I got this job, I came in and looked at sort of the way the world is changing. First of all, we're seeing our adversaries engaging in behaviors in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in the Indo-Pacific, and in our high north in a very different way and that is challenging the international rules-based order that we've all relied on for decades, centuries, almost 2 centuries, and certainly for the past 80 years, that we will all sort of abide by certain rules. And there are countries and adversaries who are challenging those rules. We're also seeing, through climate change, that our north is changing too. It's becoming far more accessible. You know, our Arctic is actually warming at 4 times the global average. We believe that by 2050, the Arctic Ocean will be the #1 point of transit between Europe and Asia. Our adversaries are aware of this, and they're moving into that area. They're mapping the sea floor. They're building up enormous capabilities. It's useful to remember that the Russians have 17 deep-water ports in the Arctic, and we have none. And so that presents a bit of a challenge. We're also seeing the nature of warfare change and conflict change quite significantly with new technologies. You know, at one point in time, and I think we've all seen the movie Failsafe, we assumed the threat was going to be Russian bombers coming up over the pole. And we've had the DEW line in place for 80 years, and you know, we've always relied on it. But the threat is changing. The threat now includes drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles. And so when the threat environment changes, we've got to change with it. And I've been thinking about that. And as well, I'm very mindful of our alliance obligations in NATO and the Indo-Pacific, and most importantly with NORAD. And so in recognition of that, I think what we have to do is making sure that our defense policy, our industrial policy, our foreign policy, and our national policy reflects that new reality and those new imperatives. I also think a lot about making sure that Canada matters in the world. I think we do matter. I think Canada has, through its history, been an important international partner. We've been there for our allies, and we have helped them be strong. But we need to make new investments. We need to take new approaches in order to continue to be that strong and powerful ally. 2 years ago, we made a commitment to NORAD modernization. It's nearly $40 billion that we're investing in over-the-horizon radars and new satellite stations and new capabilities to create real situational awareness, but it's going to take much more than that. And in my conversations with the American allies, and they remain our most important and valued partner, but from their perspective, there wasn't an awful lot of strength in the defense between Alaska and Norway. And that area, certainly over to Greenland, is primarily Canada's responsibility. And so we recognize that. But even beyond that, if I may, and this is, I hope, speaks to Canadians, the Arctic, our Arctic, is our responsibility. It's our sovereign territory. Canadians have an enormous sense of pride about this country and about every part of this country. And there is, I think, an acknowledgement among all Canadians about the importance of our North, our Arctic, our sovereignty in that part of the world. But you cannot just simply assert your sovereignty by occasionally having a plane fly by, or a ship sail by when the ice is out. When I went to the North, and I spoke to them about sovereignty, they didn't talk about that plane or that boat. They talked about infrastructure. They talked about highways, airports, fiber optics, power supply, water treatment plants, medical services. They talked about being persistently present, really present in the Arctic. And they talked about the importance of the Canadian Armed Forces. And I agree with them that we need to be there stronger, more persistently. There's also a huge opportunity, by the way, in those northern communities, a multi-use of that infrastructure. Because when we build those airport runways, when we build those power plants, when we build those highways, it's going to help the people that live there. It's going to create jobs for them, but it's also going to create a new place for Canada in its high north. And I think the responsibility of protecting it, we've got to demonstrate to our allies. And I will tell you, you're probably all aware that we entered into an obligation in Wales 14 years ago to reach 2% of our defense spending in alignment with 2% of our GDP on defense spending, in alignment with our allies. And I went back to them and said, I am moving towards that target. And we're making real progress, by the way. Our defense spending is going to increase next year by 27% over this year. It's already the largest federal budget in the government. we're making real progress. I said, but the investment we're going to make is first and foremost in Canada's defense. Because if we want to be strong around the world, we have to be strong at home. And I think it's a message that resonates with Canadians, first and foremost. But I also think it's a message that has resonated with our allies. And as we've seen with the conflict in Eastern Europe, with the conflict in the Middle East, with growing elements of conflict in the Asia-Pacific, we need to be able to demonstrate to our allies that Canada is prepared to be strong at home so that we can be strong for our allies abroad. And I think in this document we've done this. There's another element that I want to talk to because industry's in this room. We heard from you when I first started this conversation about developing a new defense policy, and we talked about what do you need in this policy. They told us really clearly, we need clarity and certainty. We need support for opening up new production lines. We need support to securing our supply chains. But they also told us we need long-term contracts. We need to know where you're going and that the money will be there so that our industry can meet you there and be there for you. And I hope, very sincerely, as you read through Canada's new national defense policy, you can see your advocacy in that document. I insisted my people make sure that your advocacy was reflected in that document. I want you to know we heard you. We heard you and we listened to you, and you were making an excellent point, and we needed to respond to it. And so, just as a small example, within that document, we heard that there needs to be an increase in domestic production of certain artillery and ammunition. We're going to invest in Canadian industry to create those new production lines and secure those supply chains, and we're putting money on the table in our budget to make sure that we can offer those long-term contracts to Canadian industry. That's the job. Let me also acknowledge to you something else that I heard from industry, and that was frustration with our procurement processes. For somebody my age and in as much of a hurry as I am, I share that frustration. But at the same time, I think you always got to be really careful. My dad taught me a long time ago, be careful when you're spending other people's money. And he's right. Defense spending is a big budget item for the Canadian government. And my responsibility is to make sure we get the Canadian Armed Forces and Canada what it needs to defend itself and to fulfill our international obligations, but also to support Canadian industry, to support Canadian workers, to support the Canadian economy. And so, I want to make sure that our procurement processes maximize the benefit of the spending that we're doing, gets the Canadian Armed Forces the equipment that they need, and responds to, there's a remarkable ecosystem of innovation and creativity in Canada. We try to support that through a number of innovation incubators, but we're disconnected from those innovation incubators and those innovators with our procurement processes. We've got to fix that. And one of the things that I think always happens in government, because I've been involved in government for a very long time, is every time something goes wrong, we add 3 more layers of process to make sure that never happens again. But over decades, we've got so many layers of process that the system no longer works. It no longer works for the Canadian Armed Forces. It no longer works to help us build capacity for the Canadian Armed Forces. It no longer works for industry. It no longer works for Canada. And so we've got to fix it. That's the job. And so we're going to fix it. But I want to offer you some assurances. I have no intention of doing that job alone. I'm going to need your advice. I'm going to need your input. I think this is a job we all have an interest in. We've all got to figure out how to make it work. And so I invite you to the table, and I'll set a large table. Not that we will paralyze ourselves in conversation. I want people to come to the table who just want to get things done, because there's an urgency to our work. The world is becoming increasingly dangerous. We have much to do together, but I think there's a huge opportunity before us. We can meet the challenge. We can answer the call and meet the moment of a changing and more dangerous environment for the world and for Canada. But if we do it together, we'll do it better. We'll do it more cost-effective. There'll be more benefits to Canadians than just merely defending our country. And I think if we can demonstrate, not just to ourselves, but to the world, that we can get our act together, that we can do this right, I think it'll build confidence among our allies as well. And I will tell you, since we published that document that's displayed behind me today, Our North, Strong and Free, people are knocking down my door, our allies. The Americans, the Australians, the Brits, the Germans, the Norwegians, the South Koreans have all come to see me, the Japanese next week. They want to partner with Canadian industry. They see that we're moving in a direction. I've told them I'm not terribly interested in just them bringing to me their catalogs of things they have to sell. But if they want to form partnerships with us to maximize the remarkable innovation environment that exists in Canada, the remarkable skills that we see in AI and in quantum and in production, the remarkable innovations, if we can make sure that through our own critical mineral strategy, for example, we maximize Canada's position and strength globally, then I think it benefits all of us. It makes the country stronger. It strengthens the alliances that keep that rules-based order in place. And it sends a very powerful and important message to our potential adversaries that we're standing strong and we're prepared to be strong in our own country. And I think somebody asked me when I first got this job, are you preparing to win the next World War? I said, no, I'm preparing to prevent it. That's the job. And I think production is deterrence. I think preparation is deterrence. Collaboration is deterrence. And I think together we can demonstrate that to our allies and to our adversaries. And most importantly, Canadians will, I think, support this because it is a national strategy. It's about the strength of our country. It's about our Arctic. It's about our responsibilities. It's about building a Canada that works for all Canadians. It's about supporting communities and making investments in our own country. And I think if with that priority, we can't help but succeed. We're just in a hurry to get there. I'll conclude now. And I thank you very much for your kind attention to this. And I also want to make an offer as I'm leaving the microphone and joining Janice in a conversation. I'm very sincere that I really want to have a new and renewed relationship with Canadian industry, with Canadian innovators. I think there's an opportunity for our work together to be mutually beneficial to the country, to make us stronger, to make us prouder. And that's the job. I'm in a hurry. I hope you're all in a hurry too. We now have a budget. One of the things that governments have a responsibility to do is provide that clarity and certainty that a budget, and many of my allies, by the way, they put out aspirational documents, things we'd like to do. In Canada, we like to make sure that we book the money first. There is more that we can do, and you'll probably see that in my document, by the way, that I'm exploring a few things. And that's because I just don't have the money yet. But we're committed to doing the work with you together, because there's huge opportunities, there's huge responsibilities, and together, I think we can get it done. Thanks very much. Shall I come off or come on? There you go.
Well, thank you, Minister Blair, for listening to industry. It's greatly appreciated. I know we've had a voice for many years, but sometimes it takes that little extra to move the needle and get things done. And we're looking forward to working with you. That's the commitment that you have from industry, especially the people in this room here. My name is Remo Assini. I'm the president of IMT Precision. You may or may not have heard of us, but you probably heard of what we do and what we produce. We manufacture medium and large caliber projectile bodies that are basically used or similar or used for Ukraine and donated by the Canadian government. IMT was born and raised in Ontario, and we've grown steadily across Canada and the U.S., and we're continuing to grow. As Minister Blair has mentioned, we are in the process of adding capacity production lines for our allies, but we're also in the process of putting proposals together to increase that capacity for Canada, something that's very, very important to us. For over 100 years, IMT has been part of the Canadian industrial base, supporting the Canadian forces and our allies. As a member of the munition supply program, similar to Cold Canada, it's our mandate to ensure that we keep and maintain the strategic capabilities to support our Canadian forces. The defense policy update could not have come at a better time. Thank you. IMT's motto is building the future, and we feel that this defense policy embraces this mantra. From building the members of our forces to investing in capabilities and relationships with industry, this industry policy propels us forward in security and prosperity. We applaud Minister Blair for the renewed and long-lasting partnership with industry. We look forward to supporting your vision and bringing in a new chapter of cooperation, growth, and innovation. Thank you, Minister Blair, members of the Canadian Armed Forces, for your commitment in keeping our North strong and free. Thank you. And on that note, I am going to introduce the final part of today's program, and that is the fireside chat with Minister Blair and moderated by Dr. Janice Stein. Janice is the Bellsberg Professor of Conflict Management and founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. She's a member of the Order of Canada and the Order of Ontario, and a frequent guest on the CBC, BBC, and more. Most recently, she co-chaired the National Advisory Committee on Canada's Indo-Pacific Strategy for Canada's Foreign Minister. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Janice Stein and welcoming back Minister Blair.
Thank you very much. And full disclosure, I chair the board of the Halifax Security Forum, and I want to thank Minister Blair for his unstinting support in bringing people from around the world to Canada to talk about the big challenges. Now, one more full disclosure, I am older than Minister Blair. So if you're on the clock, I can't tell you what speed I'm on. And that message of getting things done is, I think, music to Canadian ears, frankly. Absolutely stunning that the cover of the defense policy update is about the North. And the priority that you gave, Minister, to the Arctic. Explain why the Arctic just stood out in all its dimensions as a priority for you and for defense policy for Canada.
Thank you, Janice. You know, I spent, as I say, most of my life working in this city. But I always felt my responsibility was to Canadians. I worked for them. I helped keep them safe. When I went to government, one of the things that really motivated me, and I actually told the Prime Minister I wasn't looking for a job that caused me to travel around the world. I work for Canadians. All I wanted to do was continue to work for Canadians. That to me is what my public service really is about. I had actually spent a fair bit of time up north. I used to be the public safety and emergency preparedness minister, and they were having floods and fires and some real challenges up there. And I'm the guy who kept on asking the Canadian Armed Forces to go and help them. But when I went up there, I think like most Southerners, I had this notion of Arctic sovereignty, of that plane going by once in a while, or the ship going by every once in a while. And it was Northerners themselves who told me, and Indigenous communities, Inuit, Northern communities, talking to the Northern premiers, I said, Bill, that's not what Arctic sovereignty is about. That's not what our Arctic, Canada's Arctic is about. It really is about people first. It's about, and to support those people, it's about infrastructure. It's about creating capability there. And I heard that. I listened to it and I thought, we've got to do so much more here. And then when I talked to the Americans, I also had the experience. I was very much involved in policing in post 9/11. The Americans at the time, they quite understandably thought, okay, we're going to create Fortress America. We're going to strengthen our own perimeter. I really believed it was really important that large undefended border between us. The fact that our economies and our manufacturing processes are so integrated, it was really critical that we not sort of just have Fortress America, but that we would create the idea of Fortress North America, that we would strengthen our own perimeter, that we would be strong at home so that our allies could trust us, that we would be strong in our, that really has sort of stuck with me as well. And so as the world has become a more dangerous place, I really thought that one of my big responsibilities as Canada's Minister of National Defence was to step up and be stronger in defending Canada. And the place where we are most vulnerable is in the north. And so it was a natural decision.
You know, it's really interesting because I was saying to the minister earlier, and I agree completely. We were saying, and I'm just delighted that this has happened. I was saying to the minister recently that I said Canada is a frontline NATO state. And I could tell from the reactions in the room, people didn't really understand what I was saying. Walk us through that, because that's in fact what we are.
Well, first of all, we've got 250,000 kilometers of coastline in this country, and we share the largest maritime border of any country in the world with Russia. And Russia has demonstrated since 2014, and again most recently starting in 2022, that they are willing to challenge that rules-based order, that they will take, might makes right for them, and they will take what they want rather than follow the rules that have kept the globe safe for 80 years. And so it really is for us. You're right. We are on the front line. I've gone back to NATO, and frankly, you know, we talk obviously a great deal about the eastern frontier of NATO. Canada is building up to brigade strength in our job in Latvia to help with European security against, you know, Russian aggression. But it was really, I think, really helpful when Finland and Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and others now are united at the NATO table. There's a remarkable strength in that, because all of a sudden there are Arctic nations, and recognition that the northern frontier is also a place that needs to be secure. And we can do it together. So between the United States and Norway, there's a number of countries that can be united and strong. And we've got the largest geography of responsibility there, and so we have to step up for it.
That's in fact, again, you know, a stunning fact that Canadians don't fully appreciate, and the Defence Policy Review tells such a compelling story. We have the largest geography up north, and we are directly across Russia. One statistic I saw, Minister, and you alluded to this, Russia is spending 15 times more on infrastructure in the north than any other Arctic Council member. You talked about infrastructure spending in the north. How are you going to connect the defense infrastructure to the civilian infrastructure? This is a big challenge, frankly.
Actually, first of all, I think it's a great opportunity. It's a challenge as well, but it's a huge opportunity for multi-use infrastructure. I've got to make investments to make sure that we can take our fighter planes. We can practice and operate in the north, that we have to be a more persistent presence for the military. But doing that in collaboration, cooperation with Indigenous northern communities, it creates a huge opportunity for us, because all of the infrastructure I will need to build for the Canadian Armed Forces can be used for Canadians living in those parts of our country as well. And I think there's a huge benefit in that. There's infrastructure that will enable us, you know, when we talk about our sovereignty, it won't be that, you know, it's a big, vast, empty space. You got to start to fill it in a bit. There's also huge opportunities in the north that we have not been able to exploit because it's so inaccessible, with mining and critical minerals. And there are many, many new opportunities. And as I said, with the Arctic, the climate changing up there, and that potentially becoming the primary trade route. As you say, the Russians have 17 deepwater ports there. They have remarkable infrastructure capabilities, and we do not.
We have none.
And well, we have some, but it needs to be built out. Yeah. And so that's why I said that this is a defense policy, but for me, it's also national policy. It's about creating the Canada that we want. And it's about making sure that in every part of Canada, we are prepared to stand strong.
And I think there's a new receptivity, Minister, among our Indigenous community. There's excitement at the opportunity as well, and a desire to be equity partners with the government as you take this vision forward.
In fairness, I was in Yellowknife last week. I'm off to Iqaluit on Sunday. I think it's really important to engage with people. There is a real opportunity. I think there is real excitement. I've been meeting with the Dene, with First Nations, with Inuit leadership, as well as the northern premiers and northern communities. And there's an opportunity, but there's also a responsibility here. they want to be consulted. They want to be engaged. Frankly, it's their land. They've been stewards of that land for millennia. They know a lot. They can contribute a lot. But they also want to make sure that Canada's, my Canadian Armed Forces use of their neighborhood is compatible and consistent and benefits them and the country. I think it's a great opportunity. But it's a lot of work.
Yes.
Engaging that consultation, but the work's worth it. Like, we can produce real outcomes, real benefits to everyone in doing this. And I think, again, being strong is not just being strong militarily, it's being strong domestically. It's being strong in your economy, in your communities, that people can live there, can be healthy, that their kids can prosper, that, like, creating that environment across the North is really part of my idea of how to defend the country.
And I think it's such a compelling vision. You can hear that we're turning a page, frankly, in the way we think about our North. It's not for no reason that it's our North in the title. You talked about industrial policy as well, which is so important and so closely connected to a successful defense policy. As you look and called, I think, for solutions from people in the room, if you're like me and on a short clock, you don't want to hear about the problem, you want to hear about the solution to the problem at the same time. It's very efficient. You also talk about sovereignty and how important it is that we see, that we know what's going on, and we're a big country. When you think about our underwater seeing, our sensors and space and the connections between them, there are hidden gems in here about the new connections between space and underwater sensing. Tell us a little bit of those and how you see the future.
And again, the world's changing, and technologies and climate are having huge impacts on that. But I think historically we've always looked at the armed forces responsibilities as being, marine, air, and land. And there are two very new but equally concerning theaters of potential risk that we have to take into account. One of them is cyber. And what we are seeing among our adversaries is, we as a society and as a world, we have become so reliant on digital technologies. And we're going to become increasingly reliant upon it. Our adversaries have figured this out. Like, I will tell you, because I'm responsible also for the Communications Security Establishment, CSE, and the Cyber Center in Canada, we see millions of attacks on our systems, federally, provincially, municipally, and in the private sector every single day. And so we've got to be strong there. There's money in this policy update to create a new cyber force. That I think is absolutely essential, and by the way, not something that government can do alone. We'll have to do it in partnerships with everybody at the table, in the room and across the country, and even around the world, to be strong there. But we're making those investments. They're critical. And you bring up the important domain of space. I just met with the Space Council, and of course we're establishing a new Space Council.
Say a little more about that, because I don't think people know.
Of course, and I think it's an acknowledgement. I was down at NORAD. I've talked to their Space Command. My own general, who has that responsibility for us, we recognize this as both an opportunity and a threat environment. And I think I don't want to approach it just simply from a defensive standpoint, but I think there's great opportunity for us up there. We're going to make some new investments, and I kind of smiled. I met with the Canadian space officials earlier this week, and they came to me and said, thanks so much for investing in a Space Council. They're really excited about the possibilities that creates. They then said, we want to make sure we have good people at the table. And I was assuring them, don't worry, I've got brilliant people that will come from the Canadian Armed Forces and from our cyber force and from D&D. And they said, no, we want you to be on it. And I said, the person who knows the least. Like, I'm not sure that contributes, but they said, no, but we need to get things done. And we need somebody that can help us get things done. And so I said, sure, I'll be on your council then. And because we're all keen to get things done. Again, great opportunities, but I also get the benefit of threat assessments on various environments and challenges we face. The space one would scare the daylights out of you. It scares the daylights out of me, and it really causes me to think we've got so much to do there. We've got great allies. I think we've got great potential, but we're going to have to answer the call and meet that moment.
You know, we don't think about it, but everyone who brought a phone into this room and might use your GPS sometime this weekend is dependent on satellites that are in low orbit space.
You're going to use your GPS whether you know it or not.
Yeah, you're going to use your
That's the thing.
GPS whether you know it or not. Exactly. And that's connected also to one of the subjects that came up at the table, because you see this close connection between security abroad and security at home, is our cyber record, not in the core institutions of government, but especially in our medium-sized businesses. Again, we have the right partners in the room. How do we improve our performance there? Because as you rightly just said, the attacks are growing in frequency and in intensity.
I actually think this is a place where Canada punches well above its weight. That's been my experience, but not just in my government institutions, but in the private sector as well. I think we've got a great deal to contribute to global security among our allies and for our industries and for academia. We know the threat environment. We know that our adversaries are really leaning in on this, but I think Canada has demonstrated on many occasions that it has more capability than most, if not all. And I can also tell you, we're invited to the table often, and not just to bring government agencies, but our industry to that table. I think there's a great deal we can contribute. You know, there are a number of, you know, we talk about cyber. I mentioned earlier my remarks about critical mineral. I think there's a huge vulnerability because for a number of years we've just sort of gone along and assumed that everybody would be benign and it would be fine. But those supply chains and the things that we have come to really rely on as a country and as a society and our industries, our adversaries have been working really hard over the past number of years to secure those supply chains. And if we ever got into a situation where they turned them off, we'd be in trouble. And so we've got to step up there. And it's not necessarily in the defensive realm, but it's entirely in the defensive realm, in my opinion. And so I think about that a lot too, because like making us strong is not just making sure we've got the right planes and boats and artillery pieces and ammunition. It really is about making us strong as a country, as a society, and all the things that we've come to rely on.
Minister, I'm getting a signal from Natasha that we've got 2 minutes left.
Oh, then I'll try to be quicker in my answers.
Well, this is a very self-serving question because the minister said to me as he was walking in that he read something I had written recently about mattering more to the United States. And I know the minister cares deeply about Canada mattering more. How do we take that agenda on?
Yeah, and by the way, I don't know whether you saw it in the Globe and Mail, an excellent piece that Janice wrote with a couple of others, and I read it when it came out, and I read it again this morning because I thought, a good lead up to this thing. I think Canada does matter, first of all. I think Canada does matter, and I think our adversaries, or excuse me, our allies and our adversaries, they recognize Canada matters, but you can't just be complacent about that. You can't just think that everybody likes us because we're really nice, and you got to be able to. You got to make yourself not just matter, that they would respect and invite us to the table, but matter that we're coming with something valuable, that we're going to make a real contribution. I think about that in our relationship with the United States. And I alluded in my earlier remarks about, you know, making sure that we mattered by being part of continental defense, that we can really contribute in a meaningful way. I think that we have strengths. That we need to leverage those strengths. We need to think about what we're really good at and be even better at it and go out there and promote that. We also need, one of the things that Canada always brings to the table is a certain amount of humility.
Maybe a little too much?
Sometimes a little too much. But it is also, it's our reputation among our allies, but we need to lean in a little bit more. I have told our allies, Canada's not going to sit at the kids' table. We've got a lot to contribute, and I think that there's a growing recognition that we are prepared to earn our place at the table. I think there's huge opportunities. You know, we talked a little bit earlier. Some of our Five Eyes partners entered into an agreement with respect to submarines. You mentioned submarines for the AUKUS agreement, but there's huge opportunity beyond just the technology around nuclear submarines. There's issues. There's things that need to be done in AI and in quantum in particular that are going to be hugely important to the success of our allies, but our success as well, because we also have responsibility in underwater surveillance. And we're looking at our options very carefully, and we'll do what's right for Canada. But I want to be at that table, and I want to make sure Canadian industry is at that table. Canadian innovators are at that table. We've got a great deal to contribute, and it's going to help us matter.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can see the advantages of being on the clock, right? I would only, first of all, thank the minister, both for the impromptu remarks that drive your team absolutely nuts, and for this free-flowing conversation that we've had. And I would only say to everybody else in the room, watch this minister get things done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for moderating that discussion, and a big thank you to you, Minister, for being here today, especially for your commitment and passion to implementing Canada's defense policy. We absolutely matter, and all of you at all of your tables, you absolutely matter. Thank you for being here today. A big thank you to our partners, including IMT Precision, Colt Canada, Amazon Web Services, and of course Bombardier, and I hope everyone has a lovely weekend. Thank you so much for your time. Cheers.